This photograph proves everything. You lied to me. Don't you dare deny it.
No, wait, it's not what it looks like.
The restaurant's grand chandelier flickered overhead, casting a cold light over the room. James Colton's fingers tapped on the linen tablecloth, the sound echoing like a ticking clock. Maya Lawson stood before him, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to steady her breath. The tension between them crackled, palpable, the kind of power dynamic that made the rich feel untouchable, and the rest of the world seemed like a pawn to be moved. Colton leaned back in his chair, his tailored suit immaculate. His face, a mask of control, was only disturbed by the slightest twitch of his lips as he spoke. "I think you know why I'm doing this," he said, his voice smooth, like oil slipping through cracks. Maya swallowed. She'd been a waitress here for 3 months. She'd seen the way people like Colton treated those who worked for them. She'd seen how his eyes never met hers, how the words please and thank you were a language he had no need for. But this was different. She had watched as he dismissed others' assistants, servers, even managers, as if they were nothing more than shadows. Today, though, it was her turn. The customer he'd been rude to had made a fuss, and Maya had been the unlucky one to deliver the bad news. Colton didn't care. He never did. "I'm going to need you to leave, Maya," he said, his words cold, final. "You've proven yourself incapable." The words hit like a slap, but Maya didn't flinch. She didn't flinch because she knew something he'd eyed in single quotes. Slowly, almost deliberately, she reached into her apron and pulled out a thick folder. Colton's eyes flicked toward it, but his smile never wavered. He had no reason to fear. He was the one who had power, the one with the money, the one who controlled every inch of this place. What could a waitress possibly hold over him? "I don't think you understand the position you're in," Maya said, her voice steady, unwavering. She slid the folder across the table, the thin paper of the manila folder brushing against his fingertips. "You've been careless, Mr. Colton." His fingers hovered over the folder, but he didn't touch it. "You think a few complaints from customers will change anything?" He chuckled, an arrogant, dismissive sound that rang through the room. "I've built this empire with 1,000 deals like the one you've just mentioned. You are nothing." Maya didn't respond with words. Instead, she opened the folder, letting the contents spill onto the table. Photographs, documents, names. The photos were grainy, but clear enough. Meetings, papers, smiling faces, all under the guise of corporate ventures. But in truth, they were evidence of a different reality. A world of corruption, fraud, and secret deals. Colton's empire wasn't built on legitimate business alone. The ugly truth of his rise to power lay in the dark underbelly of money laundering, exploitation, and blackmail. Colton's face paled, just a shade. The confidence he had carried moments before vanished, replaced by something else, uncertainty. He leaned forward, his hand gripping the folder now, his eyes scanning the contents. The illusion of control he'd cultivated over years was slipping away. "You have..." His voice was low, almost a whisper. Maya met his gaze, her face calm, unyielding. "You've been living in a world where people like you think you can do whatever you want, to whoever you want. But I'm not going to let you get away with it." For a moment, the room was silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the chandelier. Maya could feel her pulse quicken, but she remained still, the calm before the storm. "I already sent this to a reporter," she continued, her words firm, carrying a weight he could no longer ignore. "Your days of hiding are over." Colton's breath hitched, but he stood quickly, knocking his chair back in the process. He was losing control. "You think you can ruin me?" His voice rose, but there was no confidence in it, only a brittle edge of panic. Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her gaze, steady, unwavering, was enough. She had done what she came to do, and in that look, Colton saw it, the end of his empire, the beginning of her unyielding pursuit of justice. Maya's mother always said the same thing: keep your head up, no matter how heavy the world feels. Maya had heard it 1,000 times, but it wasn't until she stood in the opulent restaurant, gazing at the faces of the city's elite, that she fully understood the weight behind those words. As she carried plates of lobster and wine, she could feel their eyes follow her, never meeting hers, never seeing her as more than a server. It was the unspoken language of the privileged, a language Maya had learned to endure, just like her mother had endured it years ago. Flashback. In the small kitchen of their cramped apartment, Maya watched her mother scrub pots late into the night. Her mother's hands, calloused from years of cleaning the homes of the wealthy, would never stop moving. She had worked for the same family for nearly 2 decades, a silent servant in their home, invisible except when they needed something. But despite it all, Maya's mother kept her smile, kept her dignity intact, and never allowed the weight of her work to break her spirit. "You don't have to work like this forever, Maya," her mother would say, wiping the sweat from her brow. "But remember, you'll have to fight harder than anyone else to get there." Those words stuck with Maya. They became the backdrop to her life, and now, here she was, working in another luxury restaurant, another gilded cage, another reminder that the system never changed. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she gave, people like Colton, like the others, never noticed. Maya didn't mind the work itself. She had learned long ago that survival meant being invisible. The trick was to make yourself useful, stay out of the way, and blend in. But today, as she stood in front of Colton, it wasn't the usual cold arrogance she'd expected. This time, it was different. She'd been serving him for weeks, always noticing the same cold, dismissive attitude, but also something more. Colton was too careful, too controlled. Like a man constantly watching his own back, she had learned to notice the little things. One evening, as she went to take his order, she saw something slip from his coat pocket, just a corner of a document. Maya paused, her heart skipping a beat. In the half-second it took to react, the paper disappeared beneath his table. But she had seen enough. She had seen the logo, the company name that had been at the center of a scandal months ago, the one her mother had warned her about. Maya knew right away that Colton wasn't just a CEO. He was a player in something much darker, something corrupt. And in that moment she made a decision. After the shift, Maya waited. She stayed long after the last customer had left, walking through the empty restaurant, past the polished counters and gleaming chandelier. It was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. She knew where Colton's coat would be, knew which room was his. It wasn't by chance that she found what she did. In the dimly lit office, the papers were scattered across the desk, financial records, contracts and photos. Maya picked up the first photo, a shot of Colton with several other men, all laughing together, their faces obscured by shadows. But one man in the corner, his face barely visible, was someone Maya recognized from the news, a name tied to illegal corporate deals and shady connections. Her hands trembled as she turned the page. More documents, contracts, wires and invoices, all tied to a web of criminal activity she'd only heard about in whispers. There it was, clear as day. Colton was linked to it all. The money laundering schemes, the offshore accounts, and the dark alliances. It was everything she needed to bring him down. But Maya wasn't just doing this for herself. She wasn't just seeking revenge for the injustice she'd faced all her life. Her heart pounded with the realization. This was bigger than one man. This was a system built on greed, where the rich and powerful crushed anyone beneath them. People like Colton used their wealth to shield themselves from the consequences of their actions, while ordinary people like Maya and her mother paid the price. It was time for the world to see the truth. Maya held the folder tightly in her hands. This was her chance. The moment her mother's lessons would finally come to fruition. She wasn't just going to survive this world, she was going to expose it. And if Colton thought he could dismiss her like everyone else had done, he was wrong. The door clicked behind her as she left the office, the folder secure under her arm. The weight had shifted, and in that small, quiet moment, Maya realized something else. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. The night split itself in two, one half dim and cramped, the other glowing with quiet wealth. Maya stood at the center of the first half. Her small apartment felt even smaller tonight, its thin walls shaking softly with noise from upstairs. A single lamp cast a warm circle over her table, where overdue bills lay stacked like quiet warnings. She breathed slowly, steadying herself after another double shift. The air smelled faintly of detergent and old paint. Yet there was a steadiness in her posture, a quiet strength built from years of holding everything together. Across the city, the second half of the night belonged to Colton Hale. His mansion sat on a hill, spread wide like a boast. Every window glowed, every surface shined. Inside, polished floors reflected the soft light of chandeliers. A private fountain whispered through the courtyard. As a man with nothing to fear. But fear was the one thing Colton pretended not to know. The contrast between their worlds felt like a drawn line, thin, sharp and cold. Back in her apartment, Maya folded her work uniform and placed it neatly on the chair for tomorrow. Her fingertips brushed the worn fabric. It was a symbol now. Long hours, low pay, and a life where every dollar had to stretch. Her younger brother's photo hung beside the door, his smile reminding her why she pushed forward. She whispered a promise to herself. Things would change. They had too. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Colton walked into his study. Dark wood shelves towered behind him, filled with books he didn't read and awards he barely remembered winning. His assistant, Grant, stood by the desk with a tablet in hand, waiting. Colton poured himself water as if every movement were planned. "Give me the numbers," he said. Grant hesitated just enough for the moment to feel heavy. "The investors are asking questions again. They're noticing inconsistencies. The last quarter's reports. They don't match." Colton's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "Then smooth them out." "You can't keep smoothing everything," Grant said quietly. "People are starting to connect the threads." For a second, the room felt colder. The weight of those threads, fraudulent deals, hidden losses, borrowed power pressed against the air. Colton set the glass down, the sound too sharp for such a calm space. "My reputation stands because I decide it stands." Grant did not argue, but his eyes carried the truth. The foundation beneath Colton's empire was thinning, like a frozen lake warming too fast. The scene shifted back to Maya. She sat on the edge of her bed, tying her worn shoes together before placing them by the door. Her apartment had no luxury, no cushion, no safety net, but it had clarity. Her life was honest, even when it was hard. Outside her window, the city lights flickered. She imagined the homes behind them, some big, some small, all carrying stories she would never know. Yet one story, she thought, was moving closer to hers. She could feel it, and far across the city, Colton felt it too. A quiet worry crept into his expression. A silent truth he could not shake. The night's two halves would not stay separate for long. The moment Maya stepped into the building, the quiet hum of power pressed against her like heat from a furnace. She walked through the marble lobby with steady steps, carrying a single folder thin but sharp enough to cut through Colton Hale's entire empire. The security guard glanced at her badge, hesitated, then waved her through. Even without knowing what she held, people sensed something different in her. Today, she was not an employee. She was a force. Colton's office sat on the top floor, behind glass that looked down on the city like a king watching his kingdom. Inside, he leaned back in his chair, pretending to be calm. But the moment Maya entered, his expression shifted. He recognized the look in her eyes, quiet, firm, unshaken. "Miss Lawson," he said, voice smooth but strained. "You asked for a meeting. I'm busy, so let's make this quick." Maya placed the folder on his desk. "You should read it." He opened it with a slow, practiced confidence. But as his eyes moved across the pages, the altered reports, fake signatures, hidden transfers, the mask cracked. His fingers tightened around the folder's edge. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "From people who used to trust you," she replied, "and from things you thought no one would notice." Colton forced a smile. "You don't know what any of this means. I know enough, and so will everyone else." The setup shattered. The rising conflict took its place. Colton closed the folder and pushed it back toward her like it was contaminated. "Let's skip the act," he said. "Tell me what you want. Money, a better job, a house. Everyone has a price. Even people like you." Maya didn't move. "You think power lives in things you own. It doesn't." Colton stood, walking slowly around the desk like a predator circling prey. "Be careful," he warned. "I can make your life very difficult." She looked directly at him. "You already tried." For a moment, the room felt still. Two worlds, two strategies, colliding in silence before the next strike. Colton exhaled sharply. "Fine. I'll double whatever you were thinking. Triple it. You walk out of here, and we forget this ever happened." Maya's voice stayed calm. "I don't want your money." Colton's face hardened. "Then what?" "Truth," she said, "and consequences." The words landed like weight on the polished floor. Colton's calm broke. He slammed his fist lightly, not violently, against the desk, a controlled display meant to scare her. But Maya didn't even flinch. "You don't understand how the world works," he snapped. "People like me don't fall." "Then you should know," Maya said softly. "I didn't bring this to you first." His eyes sharpened. "What does that mean?" "It means the folder you're holding is only a copy." She slid another paper onto his desk, "and the full set is already with someone who can't be bought." Colton stared at the paper. An email confirmation stamped with the name of a respected investigative journalist, a journalist known for exposing fraud, a journalist who loved chasing powerful liars. "You sent this already?" His voice dropped, quiet and cold. "Yes," she said. "Last night." The climax tightened. The line between them drew even clearer. Colton sank slowly back into his chair. The power he usually carried like armor slipped from his face. "You made a mistake," he whispered. "You think you're in control. But when this gets out, it will get out," Maya said. "And when it does, you'll face the truth you've avoided for years." He tried one more tactic, a soft, almost pleading tone. "Maya, we can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," she answered. "Only things to face." For the first time, he looked small in his own office. Maya turned toward the door. Her steps were steady, her purpose clear. As she left, the city spread out below her, wide, bright, open. For a moment she felt the weight of her own courage. Colton didn't move. He finally understood the new shape of the game. Then the truth once released would not return. The downfall began with a sound Colton had never feared before. Silence. Not the controlled silence he used to command, but a heavy, suspicious quiet that spread through the halls of his company like a warning. The morning after Maya's evidence hit the public, the building no longer felt like his kingdom. It felt like a courtroom preparing for judgment. Employees stood in small clusters, whispering. Eyes that once looked at him with respect now carried doubt. A few held printed articles. One headline showed his face beside the words, "Corporate Fraud Investigation Expands." Colton pushed through the lobby, pretending not to notice. But he felt the shift, the slow retreat of loyalty he once thought permanent. Upstairs, the setup of his collapse took shape. His assistant, Grant, waited at the office door, tablet in hand, face pale. "They're pulling out," Grant said before Colton even reached him. "Who?" Colton demanded. "Everyone," Grant replied. "Investors, partners, even the advisory board. They want distance." He swallowed hard. They saw the reports and the interviews. Colton stepped inside his office. The room, once a symbol of his power, suddenly felt too big, too exposed. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city stretching below him, wide and unforgiving. "What interviews?" Colton said, though he already knew. "The journalist Maya contacted released the first part of her story," Grant said. "It's everywhere. Screens across the room blinked with notifications. News anchors spoke about fraudulent contracts, manipulated numbers, and a CEO who built an empire on dishonesty. Images of documents as documents flashed across major networks. The rising conflicts tightened around him. Colton slammed the Windows switch, closing the blinds. The room dimmed, but the pressure didn't fade. "This is temporary," he said. "I'll make a statement, deny everything." Grant didn't move. "That won't work. They have proof." Colton's voice dropped. "Then I'll attack her credibility. She's a low-level worker. She has nothing." This time, Grant met his eyes. "She has the truth." It was the first time anyone had openly challenged him. The words hit harder than he expected. Across the city, the opposite reality unfolded. Maya walked into the restaurant where she worked, expecting anger, gossip, or fear. Instead, she found her co-workers gathered around her with quiet admiration. Someone squeezed her arm. Another whispered, "We're proud of you." Even customers approached her with small nods of respect. A woman at table 3 said, "Took courage to do what you did." A man near the counter added, "People like him think they're untouchable." You showed he isn't. Contrast between her world and Colton's had never been clearer. Back in the mansion he once used to escape trouble, Colton found no shelter. Phone calls rang with demands, accusations, warnings. Some partners threatened lawsuits. Others said nothing at all, choosing silence over ties to a sinking ship. His control, once precise, cold, and absolute, slipped from his hands. He tried to call board members. No answer. He tried to reach his legal team. Delayed responses. Even friends he had entertained in his grand dining hall now kept their distance. His name had become a risk. Inside his home office, Colton stared at the framed awards lining the wall. They no longer looked like achievements. They looked like artifacts from a story that was collapsing in real time. Then came the climax beat. A breaking news alert flashed on his screen. Federal regulators opened formal investigation into Hale Corporation. Following new evidence leaked, Colton lowered himself into his chair. For the first time, he felt truly still not in control, but trapped in the momentum of consequences he could no longer outrun. Across town, Maya stepped outside during her break. The afternoon sun warmed her face. People walked past her, unaware of the quiet storm she had survived to get here. She wasn't a hero to herself, just someone who refused to stay silent, but to others, she had become something more, a symbol that truth could stand up to power. The wheels of justice were turning, fast and loud. And Colton Hale could only watch as everything he built came undone. The truth did not rise slowly, it burst open. Like a locked door finally kicked from its hinges. The first report aired at sunrise. By noon, 3 more followed. Each one carried a new piece of Colton Hale's past, spoken with the calm, sharp tone of journalists who knew their evidence could not be shaken. The setup unfolded through a series of interviews, voices from years Colton hoped the world had forgotten. A former accountant appeared first. Her hands were folded tightly, as if still afraid of the man she once worked for. "He made the numbers move," she said. "Not by skill, by threats. If you didn't sign what he put in front of you, he'd replace you the next morning." Next came a supplier from 8 years earlier. "He promised fair contracts," the man said on camera. "But he changed terms without warning. When we complained, he used his contacts to shut us out of the market. We nearly lost everything." Each voice added a new crack to Colton's public image, widening the fracture already spreading through his empire. Flashbacks filled the narrative, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. The story showed a younger Colton sitting in a smoky back room, shaking hands with a local businessman known for cutting corners. Documents slid across tables. Payments were exchanged quietly, off the record. Deals were sealed, not with trust, but fear. He had built his fortune fast because he built it on people he believed would never speak. But now they were speaking. The rising conflict sharpened when investigators revealed one more truth. Colton had used shell companies to hide failures and shift losses onto innocent partners. Families had suffered, small businesses had collapsed, and through it all, Colton smiled for cameras, holding awards that now felt like contaminated symbols of a life built on deception. As the evidence spread, the contrast between him and Maya grew clearer. 2 lives moving in opposite directions. Maya watched the reports from her kitchen table, the same table where she once sorted overdue bills. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of understanding. She was no longer the invisible worker in the corner of the room. She was part of something larger. Her story was becoming a spark in a system that had needed light for a long time. Colleagues who once walked past her without noticing now reached out with messages of support. "You gave us a voice," one wrote. A customer she barely remembered sent a note, "You showed the truth matters." Even the journalist who broke the scandal called to thank her. "You didn't just expose corruption," she said. "You opened a door for others to speak." Meanwhile, Colton sat alone in his office, watching the same reports but through a very different lens. Every flashback, every interview, every piece of evidence felt like a mirror held too close. He saw himself not as the powerful leader he pretended to be, but as a man who had climbed by stepping on others. A man whose past had finally caught up with him. The climax beat struck when investigators uncovered the darkest part of his rise. He had manipulated a charity fund meant for disaster victims, taking a large cut for himself. Footage of families who never received promised help played across news networks. Their quiet pain carried more force than any accusation. Colton's face appeared beside every headline. Misused funds, illegal deals. Reckoning. He tried calling old partners for support. No answer. He tried contacting his public relations team. They had stepped away. The empire he once controlled with cold precision was now collapsing under the weight of his own actions. Maya stepped outside her apartment that evening, feeling the cool air brush against her skin. She looked at the city lights, bright, steady, unbent by the chaos unfolding elsewhere. For the first time in a long while, she felt something shift inside her. Her story was no longer about survival. It was about standing up to a system that counted on silence. And silence, finally, had broken. The cameras clicked like distant thunder, but Maya stepped up to the podium with steady hands. This was the moment Colton Hale had spent years believing would never come, a public challenge from someone he once considered too small to matter. The setup unfolded under a gray sky, outside the city courthouse. Reporters crowded in, microphones raised, lenses pointed forward. The journalist Maya trusted stood beside her, offering a quiet nod. Behind them, supporters gathered, co-workers, customers, and people who had followed her story and seen parts of themselves in her fight. Maya took a breath. "Thank you for being here," she began. Her voice was calm, but it carried across the plaza with surprising strength. Today is not just about one man's crimes. It's about a system that protected him for years. The crowd leaned in. She opened a folder, not Colton's, but her own, and held it up. "These documents show patterns of exploitation, manipulation, and lies. But this is more than paper. These are the stories of people who were ignored." Her words created a rising current, drawing the attention of every camera and every person listening. She continued, "For too long, voices like mine were pushed aside. We were told our concerns didn't matter. What they do. And today, we take them back." The journalist next to her watched with quiet pride. She had interviewed many whistleblowers before, but something about Maya felt different, more grounded, more deliberate. Her story was not driven by revenge. It was driven by justice. Across town, in a private studio, Colton prepared his own statement. He sat upright, suit pressed, expression sharp. A media consultant adjusted the lights. "You're going to take control of the narrative," the consultant said. "Stay confident. Make them doubt her." Colton nodded, but inside, a tightness grew. The cameras that once loved him now felt like traps. When the red light blinked, he spoke smoothly. "These accusations come from a disgruntled employee," he said. "Someone who misread standard business practices. I've always operated within the law." He kept his tone calm, but there was a tremor underneath one only the closest viewers noticed. He added, "I urge the public not to jump to conclusions." But conclusions were already forming. Back at the courthouse, the rising conflict surged as reporters fired questions at Maya. "Did Colton threaten you? How long was this happening? What do you want the public to do now?" Maya raised a hand. The plaza quieted. "I want people to speak," she said. "Not just about him. About every place where power is misused. Every place where truth is pushed aside. This isn't one story. It's many." Her words struck a chord. Within hours, social media flooded with responses. Former employees from other companies spoke out about similar practices. Small business owners shared stories of being pressured by corporate giants. Everyday people admitted they'd stayed silent for fear of losing what little they had. Maya's voice had become a spark, and the public carried the flame forward. Colton watched the coverage alone in his mansion. The consultant was gone. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't open, legal warnings, board resignations, angry investors. Reporters gathered outside his gate, waiting for a reaction he could no longer control. The climax beat struck when a news anchor announced, "Criminal charges now officially filed against CEO Colton Hale." The words hit him harder than any headline before. In the courthouse plaza, Maya finished her final statement. "Power should never protect wrongdoing," she said. "Not his. Not anyone's." Her voice, once quiet enough to ignore, now moved through the crowd like a clean wind cutting through heavy air. The closure settled over the moment. Colton grew more isolated by the hour, but Maya's stand grew stronger, proof that truth, when spoken clearly, can rise above even the tallest walls of power. The sound of the metal handcuffs closing around Colton Hale's wrists was quiet, but in that silence, an empire collapsed. Reporters crowded outside the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing like sudden lightning against the morning air. Colton, once the man who walked through boardrooms with a smile sharp enough to cut steel, now moved with the slow, stunned steps of someone watching his own life crumble. Federal agents stood on each side of him, steady and unmoved. Inside, Maya watched from a distance. Not hidden, simply quiet. She didn't need a front row seat. The moment itself was louder than anything she could say. This was the end of the man who had humiliated her, tried to silence her, and built his wealth on the backs of people he believed no one would ever defend. But Maya didn't smile. Justice wasn't something she celebrated. It was something she respected, the way a firefighter respects fire. Powerful, necessary, and never to be taken lightly. Colton's world continued to break apart piece by piece by piece. Agents swept through his offices. Trucks rolled away with confiscated records. Screens displayed the same headline everywhere. Billionaire Colton Hale charged in multi-level corruption case. His former partners released statements denying him. His board removed him within hours. Investors fled like shadows at sunrise. Yet the real weight wasn't the legal damage, it was the moral one. For the first time, Colton was forced to stand in the same world he had ignored, a world where rules applied to everyone. Inside the courthouse, Maya met with the lead investigator who thanked her for her patience, her courage, her consistency. "Cases like this don't move without people like you," he said. She nodded, polite, humble. "I just didn't want anyone else hurt by him," she replied. Her voice held no anger, only truth. The prosecutor handed Maya a folder listing the restitution she was legally entitled to receive: back pay, damages, and a bonus funded by seized assets. There was also a job offer from a non-profit that had followed her story closely. They wanted her leadership. They saw strength where Colton saw weakness. But Maya didn't reach for the folder right away. Instead, she looked out the window at the courthouse steps where Colton was being escorted into a transport vehicle. He still held his chin high, but his eyes, restless, cornered, told a different story. She wondered if he understood. Not the charges, not the prison time, but the truth beneath it all. Power means nothing when it is built on broken people. Hours later, the courtroom fell silent as a judge denied Colton's bail. A gasp swept through the room. For a powerful man like him, it was the ultimate message: you are accountable. Colton's jaw tightened. His fingers curled against the table, but he said nothing. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire, or a boss, or a feared decision-maker. He was simply a man facing the results of his choices. Maya watched this with a steady expression. She wasn't looking for revenge, she was looking for meaning. And now, she saw it clearly. Justice wasn't about tearing someone down. It was about lifting a weight off the people they had crushed. When the hearing ended, Maya finally picked up the folder of compensation and opportunity. She looked at it for a long moment, then closed it gently. Money wasn't why she spoke up. Power wasn't why she fought. She came from a quiet life, raised by people who believed in doing right even when no one watched, and that was the life she would return to outside. The evening sky turned a deep shade of gold, as if the world itself was taking a slow breath after a long storm. Maya stepped into that light with calm steps, knowing she had not only survived the battle, she had stayed true to who she was. Justice was done. But more importantly, she had not let darkness change her heart. At sunrise, the city lights faded one by one, as if the whole skyline was making room for Maya's new truth. Maya stepped off the bus with a calm, steady breath, her tote bag resting against her side. The world around her seemed familiar, the same cracked sidewalks, the same early morning traffic, yet something inside her had shifted. The long fight with Colton Hale was behind her, but its meaning stayed close, like a shadow that had finally learned to walk behind her instead of ahead. She was no longer the quiet waitress people ignored. She was no longer the woman fighting just to be heard. She had become something larger, something steadier, a voice that could move others to action. In her phone were emails from community leaders, organizers, and former workers who wanted guidance. They didn't see her as a victim. They saw her as a blueprint for courage. Maya didn't think of herself that way. She only thought of the people still trapped in the places she had escaped. Her morning began at a community center already buzzing with activity. Volunteers gathered around tables, preparing flyers about workers' rights and landlord abuses. Maya moved between them, offering ideas, answering questions, and listening to the fears people rarely said out loud. A young man approached her with trembling hands. "They're cutting our hours if we speak up," he said softly. Maya listened, her expression steady. "You're not alone," she told him, "and you won't fight alone." Each conversation showed her the truth she already understood. Colton was one man, but the system that allowed him to rise was much larger. His fall had opened a door, but walking through it required more work Maya was ready to face. News reports continued to follow the aftermath of his arrest. Analysts debated his downfall, panels discussed corruption, and the public devoured the story. Yet for Maya, the noise around his collapse had become background sound. The real story was happening here in small rooms where people tried to rebuild their dignity. At lunch, she met with the board of the non-profit that had offered her a full-time position. They had been watching her work quietly for weeks. Today, they wanted her to lead an initiative focused on fair labor practices. "You changed the path of a major case," one board member said. "Imagine what you could do with the right tools." Maya's gaze drifted to a stack of case files on the table. Stories of workers cheated, bullied, ignored. Each folder felt like a reminder of where she had come from. Each one carried a piece of someone else's struggle. She nodded. "If I do this," she said, "it's not for titles. It's for them." Late in the afternoon, she arrived at the nonprofit's downtown office, the space that would soon be hers. A staff member unlocked the door and stepped aside. Inside, the room was simple. A sturdy desk, a window overlooking the city, an empty bulletin board waiting for plans that didn't exist yet. Maya walked toward the window. The city below was loud, complicated, and imperfect, but it was hers. This view wasn't luxury. It was responsibility. In the glass reflection, she saw the contrast clearly, the woman she was when Colton mocked her, and the woman she had become because she refused to stay silent. This new office wasn't a reward. It was a start. Maya placed her hand on the windowsill, letting the sunlight fall across her fingers. The road ahead was long, and the work would be heavy, but her belief in justice was strong, steady, and unshakable. The fight wasn't over. It was finally beginning. Change did not roar through the city. It arrived quietly, like a wave that kept returning no matter how many times the shore tried to push it back. In the months after Colton Hale's fall, something subtle but powerful moved through the community. It began with whispers at bus stops, small meetings in church basements, and late-night calls between workers who had long felt alone. Maya's stand had cracked something open. The truth had slipped into places that once protected corruption, and people were learning to speak again. Maya watched these shifts from a careful distance. She never claimed credit. She simply kept working, helping one case at a time, guiding people who felt the weight she had once carried. Her days were filled with small victories: a worker who won back wages, a tenant who pushed back against unfair treatment, a mother who filed her first complaint without fear. Each act was small on its own, but together they formed a pattern, the beginning of something larger. Not everyone welcomed the change. Across the city, old systems tried to tighten their grip. Some companies hired public relations teams to control the damage. Others pressured employees to stay silent. A few even whispered that Maya had destroyed a man who made jobs, twisting the truth to protect power. But those claims weakened as more voices stepped forward. Journalists began reporting new cases, tracing the long trail of corruption that Colton had not built alone. His downfall had become a flashlight pointed toward a darker network of silent deals and hidden abuses. Investigators reopened files. Prosecutors reviewed complaints once ignored. What started as Maya's personal fight had widened into a public reckoning. Meanwhile, in a state prison miles away, Colton Hale sat behind a steel table during visiting hours. He received fewer visitors each month. He had once believed he controlled everything: markets, contracts, even people's fear. But the silence around him grew heavier. He had lost what he valued most: influence. For the first time, he faced a truth he could not spin. His choices had built his empire, and his choices had destroyed it. The ripple had reached him too, but its touch was cold. Back in the city, activists organized marches, students wrote essays about justice, workers filmed videos about unsafe conditions, unafraid of losing their jobs because they knew someone, even if just one person, would stand with them. That someone was often Maya. One afternoon, Maya attended a community forum inside a converted gym. Folding chairs filled the room, and a microphone stood at the center. People took turns sharing their stories: quiet, painful, brave. A young woman approached the microphone and said, "I never thought anyone would care about people like us. But when Maya spoke up, it made me think maybe we didn't have to stay quiet forever." The room turned toward Maya. She didn't stand. She didn't speak. She simply nodded, a small gesture that carried the weight of everything she had survived. It was in that moment she understood the full reach of her actions. Her fight with Colton had changed more than one life. It had given people permission to hope again. The wave she started was still moving. Later that evening, Maya walked home under the soft glow of streetlights. The city felt different now, not perfect, but awake. She knew the battle for justice was long and often exhausting, but she also knew the truth. She was no longer fighting just for herself. She walked with the knowledge that others would follow, and others after them, because justice, even when hard won, was always worth a fight.